The crash echoed through the grand foyer of Hartwell Manor as Count Benjamin Hartwell hurled his breakfast tray against the marble wall, sending fine china scattering across the floor in 1,000 glittering pieces. "Get out!" His voice thundered through the corridors, causing the newest nurse, the 7th in 3 months, to flee in tears. "Your lordship, please." Phillips, the long-suffering butler, began. "I don't want to hear it, Phillips. No more nurses. No more companions. No more well-meaning fools trying to help me." Benjamin's steel-blue eyes blazed with fury as he gripped the wheels of his chair. "I can take care of myself." "Sir, with respect, yesterday you refused to eat anything, and the day before you wouldn't allow anyone to—" "The day before that simpering woman tried to spoon-feed me like I was an infant." Benjamin's voice cracked with the kind of rage that came from 2 years of helplessness. "I may be crippled, Phillips, but I still have my dignity." Phillips watched sadly as his master wheeled himself toward the library, the only room in the vast estate where Benjamin seemed to find any peace. 2 years ago, a riding accident had stolen the use of his legs and, it seemed, his will to live. The vibrant, charismatic man who had once been the pride of Massachusetts society had become a bitter recluse who drove away anyone who dared to show him kindness. As Benjamin settled into his favorite spot by the library windows, staring out at the snow-covered grounds he would never walk again, he didn't see the figure approaching the manor's front gate. Elena Foster pulled her threadbare cloak tighter against the December wind as she studied the imposing facade of Hartwell Manor. The advertisement in the Boston Herald had been brief. Companions sought for disabled gentlemen. Excellent wages. Previous applicants need not reapply. The last line had been added in different ink, suggesting desperation. Elena needed the work. 6 months of widowhood had left her with nothing but debts and a determination to survive that had carried her through worse trials than a difficult employer. "Mrs. Foster?" Phillips opened the door before she could knock, his expression mixing hope with resignation. "I'm afraid there may have been some confusion." "About the companion position?" "No confusion." Eleanor's voice was calm, confident. "I'm here to apply." Phillips studied her carefully. Unlike the previous applicants, young women seeking easy money or older ones driven by pity, Eleanor Foster carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had faced real hardship and survived. "Ma'am, I feel obliged to warn you. His lordship is challenging. Most worthwhile things are." Eleanor stepped into the foyer, her green-grey eyes taking in the opulent surroundings without intimidation. "Where is he?" "The library." "But Mrs. Foster, perhaps it would be better if you—" Eleanor was already walking toward the sound of wheels on marble, following an instinct she couldn't quite name. She found Benjamin Hartwell exactly where Phillips had predicted, silhouetted against tall windows, his profile sharp with bitterness. Even seated, she could see he was a magnificent man, with the kind of aristocratic bearing that 2 years of confinement hadn't managed to break. "I told Phillips no more—" Benjamin began without turning around, then stopped as he caught sight of Elena's reflection in the window glass. She wasn't what he expected. Where the other women had approached with obvious pity or nervous chatter, this one simply stood in the doorway, studying him with calm intelligence. "Count Hartwell," Eleanor said quietly. "I'm Elena Foster. I'm here about the companion position." "Are you?" Benjamin turned his wheelchair to face her fully, his blue-grey eyes scanning her appearance with calculated cruelty. "Let me save us both some time, Mrs. Foster. I don't need a companion. I don't want company. I certainly don't need another woman coming here to pat my head and tell me how brave I am for surviving my tragic accident." Elena didn't flinch. "Good, because I wasn't planning to do any of those things." Benjamin's eyes narrowed. "Then what exactly were you planning to do?" "Whatever needs doing. Cook if you're hungry, read if you're bored, argue if you need the stimulation." Eleanor stepped closer, and Benjamin noticed she moved with the grace of someone accustomed to hard work. "But mostly I was planning to treat you like a man instead of an invalid." "How refreshing." Benjamin's voice dripped sarcasm. "And what makes you think you're qualified to be here, Mrs. Foster? What's your experience with difficult men?" "I was married to one for 6 years. The simple honesty of her answer caught Benjamin off guard. "Was. He died last summer. Consumption." Elena's voice held grief, but also acceptance. "He spent the last 2 years of his life angry at the world for his illness, angry at me for trying to help, angry at himself for not being the man he used to be." Benjamin felt something uncomfortable twist in his chest. "And did you cure him of his anger, Mrs. Foster?" "No, but I learned that anger is often just fear wearing a disguise." The words hung between them like a challenge. "And what am I afraid of?" Benjamin's voice was dangerously quiet. Elena studied his face. The sharp cheekbones, the proud line of his jaw, the eyes that held too much pain for a man only 35 years old. The same thing my husband was afraid of, that you're not who you used to be, and you don't know how to be anyone else. Benjamin stared at her, speechless for perhaps the first time in 2 years. Elena moved closer to his wheelchair, and Benjamin tensed, expecting the usual awkward attempts to help him. Instead, she simply rested one hand gently on the arm of his chair, not on him, not condescending, just a simple human connection. "Count Hartwell," she said softly, "you're right. You're not the same man you were before your accident, but that doesn't mean you're less than you were. Here just means you get to decide who you want to become now." For a moment, Benjamin forgot to be angry. Her touch on his wheelchair felt like the first honest contact he'd had with another human being in 2 years. "Mrs. Foster," he said quietly, "why do you really want this position?" "Because I need the work. Because this house feels like it's holding its breath, waiting for someone to start living in it again. And because—" She paused, her green-gray eyes meeting his directly. "Because I think you need someone who's not afraid of your anger." "And you're not afraid?" Elena's smile was sad but genuine. "Count Hartwell, I've watched the man I loved die by inches. I've buried my husband, sold everything I owned to pay his medical bills, and walked 20 miles through snow to get here. Your anger doesn't frighten me, your isolation does." Benjamin looked down at her hand, still resting on his wheelchair, and realized it was the first time in 2 years that human touch hadn't felt like pity. "The position pays $50 a month," he said abruptly. "The advertisement said 30. The advertisement was wrong." "Why?" "Because," Benjamin said, meeting her eyes with something that might have been hope, "I have a feeling you're going to earn every penny." As Eleanor Foster smiled, the first genuine smile Hartwell Manor had seen in 2 years, neither of them realized they were beginning something that would challenge everything they thought they knew about love, healing, and the difference between surviving and truly living. But they were about to find out. 3 weeks into Elena's employment, Hartwell Manor had undergone a subtle but unmistakable transformation. The servants moved with more purpose. Meals were served on schedule, and for the first time in 2 years, Benjamin Hartwell was eating regularly. "You're manipulating me," Benjamin said, without looking up from his breakfast, as Eleanor entered the dining room with fresh coffee. "Am I?" Eleanor refilled his cup with practiced efficiency. "How so?" "Yesterday you mentioned that the East Wing needs repairs, specifically the library ceiling that's been leaking for months. This morning I find myself actually concerned about water damage to the first edition books." "Terrible manipulation indeed." Elena's voice was dry with humor. "Making you care about your own property." Benjamin finally looked up, studying her face. Over the weeks, he'd noticed things about Elena Foster that the other applicants had lacked. Intelligence behind her quiet manner, strength in the way she carried herself, and something else that made him uneasy. She never looked at him with pity. "Eleanor," he said, using her first name for the first time, "sit down. I have work to—" "Sit down." Eleanor raised an eyebrow at his commanding tone, but settled into the chair across from him. "Yes, your lordship. Tell me about your husband." The question clearly caught her off guard. "Why?" "Because in 3 weeks you've learned more about me than most people discover in years. Yet I know almost nothing about you, except that you're a widow who needs work." Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, her green-grey eyes distant. "His name was David. He was a teacher before he got sick. Brilliant, passionate about literature and philosophy. How did you meet?" "I was his student. Well, initially." Eleanor's smile was soft with memory. "He was everything I thought I wanted in a husband. Educated, refined, gentle. But when consumption began to take his strength, he became someone else entirely. Bitter, angry, convinced that his illness made him less of a man." Elena's voice grew quiet. "I spent 2 years trying to convince him he was wrong, and 2 years failing." Benjamin felt an uncomfortable recognition. "What did he say to you when he was angry?" "That I was wasting my time on a broken man, that I should leave him for someone whole." Eleanor met his eyes directly. "That no woman could truly love a man who wasn't complete." The words hit Benjamin like physical blows, because they echoed his own thoughts so precisely. "And what did you tell him?" "That love isn't about perfection. It's about choosing someone completely, including their struggles." "Did he believe you?" "No." Eleanor's honesty was stark. "He died believing he was a burden I endured out of duty." Benjamin set down his coffee cup, his hands unsteady. "Eleanor, why are you telling me this?" "Because I see you making the same mistake he did. Defining yourself by what you've lost instead of what you still have. Before Benjamin could respond, Phillips appeared in the doorway, his face troubled. Your lordship, you have visitors. Lord and Lady Morrison, and their daughter, Miss Victoria. Benjamin's expression immediately hardened. I'm not receiving visitors. Sir, they're already in the blue parlour. Lady Morrison was quite insistent. Eleanor noticed the way Benjamin's hands gripped his wheelchair arms, the way his jaw tightened with something that looked like dread. Who are they? She asked quietly. Old family friends. And Victoria. Benjamin's voice was bitter. Victoria Morrison was supposed to be my wife before the accident. Supposed to be? Our engagement was announced 2 weeks before my riding accident. She broke it off while I was still unconscious in the hospital bed. Eleanor felt something cold settle in her stomach. And now she's here? Now she's here? Benjamin began wheeling toward the parlour with grim determination, coming to see the tragic Count Hartwell in his natural habitat. Eleanor followed, something protective stirring in her chest. The blue parlour was awash with expensive silk and manufactured sympathy. Lady Morrison, a woman who wielded social influence like a weapon, rose gracefully as Benjamin entered. Benjamin, darling, how wonderful to see you looking so well. The pause before well spoke volumes. Lord Morrison, clearly uncomfortable, nodded stiffly. Hartwell, good to see you're managing. But it was Victoria Morrison who commanded attention. She was undeniably beautiful. Golden hair, perfect features, and a figure that her emerald silk dress displayed to advantage. She was everything a count's wife should be. She was also studying Benjamin's wheelchair with poorly concealed revulsion. Benjamin, Victoria's voice was honey over ice, you look different. 2 years of confinement will do that. Benjamin's tone was carefully neutral, but Elena could see the tension in his shoulders. Victoria's gaze shifted to Elena, taking in her simple brown dress and practical hairstyle. And this is Mrs. Elena Foster, my companion. Companion. Victoria's smile was sharp. How progressive of you. Lady Morrison settled herself in the finest chair as if claiming territory. Benjamin, we've come to discuss a delicate matter. Have you? Your situation has become quite concerning to your friends. Living here alone, refusing society, surrounding yourself with... Her eyes flicked meaningfully toward Elena. Inappropriate company. Elena felt her cheeks burn, but Benjamin's voice cut through the room like a blade. Inappropriate. Oh, Benjamin. Victoria stepped closer, her voice taking on a coaxing tone. Surely you must see how this looks. A young woman living in your house, unchaperoned, caring for your personal needs. Mrs. Foster is my employee. Nothing more. The words stung Elena more than they should have, though she kept her expression carefully neutral. Of course she is, Lady Morrison said with false understanding. But people talk, dear boy. And your reputation... My reputation? Benjamin's laugh was bitter. Lady Morrison, I'm a crippled recluse who hasn't left his estate in 2 years. What reputation could I possibly have left to protect? Victoria moved to stand beside his wheelchair, her hand reaching toward his shoulder in a gesture that looked compassionate but felt possessive. That's exactly why I'm here, Benjamin, to make you an offer. Eleanor watched Victoria's performance with growing unease. There was something calculated about her compassion, something practiced about her concern. What kind of offer? Benjamin asked warily. Marriage. The word dropped into the room like a stone into still water. Victoria, hear me out. Victoria's voice grew stronger, more confident. I know our previous engagement ended badly, but I've had time to think, to realize that love means accepting someone completely, regardless of circumstances. Elena felt something crack in her chest at hearing her own words, twisted into Victoria's manipulation. I want to be your wife, Benjamin, to care for you, to give you the respectability of a proper marriage, to help you reclaim your place in society. How generous, Benjamin said quietly. It would solve all your problems. No more gossip about inappropriate living arrangements. No more concerns about your care. Victoria's hand finally reached his shoulder. No more loneliness. Eleanor watched Benjamin's face, searching for any sign of what he was thinking. His expression was unreadable, but she noticed his hands had relaxed slightly on the wheelchair arms. And what would you get from such a marriage, Victoria? The satisfaction of doing my duty, of helping an old friend. Victoria's smile was radiant with false nobility, and of course the eventual inheritance would provide security for any children we might have. Eleanor felt sick. Victoria was offering herself as a sacrifice for the sake of Benjamin's fortune, while making it sound like charitable love. Benjamin, Lady Morrison added, This is an opportunity to restore normalcy to your life, to have a proper wife instead of relying on hired help for companionship. The insult was clear. Eleanor was being dismissed as a temporary solution, easily replaced by a woman of appropriate breeding. "I need time to consider this," Benjamin said finally. "Of course." Victoria's smile was triumphant. "Take all the time you need. I'll be staying at the Morrison estate for the next month, waiting for your answer." As the Morrisons prepared to leave, Victoria turned back to Elena with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mrs. Foster, isn't it? You must be so relieved to know your services may no longer be needed soon. I imagine it's been quite a burden, caring for someone in Benjamin's condition." Elena met her gaze steadily. "I've never considered it a burden, Miss Morrison." "How sweet. But surely you must look forward to returning to a more suitable position?" The message was clear. Elena was being warned away. After the visitors left, the manor fell into heavy silence. Benjamin sat motionless in the parlor, staring at the space where Victoria had stood. "Are you going to marry her?" Eleanor asked quietly. Benjamin looked up, his blue-grey eyes unreadable. "Would it matter to you if I did?" Elena felt her heart hammering, but she kept her voice steady. "It would matter to me that you were making the right choice for the right reasons." "And what would be the right reasons?" "Love, mutual respect, genuine partnership." Elena paused. "Not convenience or social expectation." Benjamin studied her face for a long moment. "Eleanor, what Victoria said about your position here, about the impropriety. I'll resign if you wish it." "That's not what I meant." Benjamin's voice was frustrated. "I meant that she's not wrong. Your reputation could be damaged by staying here, especially if people believe..." "Believe what?" "That there's something between us beyond professional obligation." Elena felt her breath catch. "And is there?" The question hung between them, dangerous and honest. "I don't know," Benjamin said finally. "But I'm beginning to think that's exactly what I'm afraid to find out." As Elena left him alone in the parlor, she realized that Victoria Morrison's visit had changed everything. The comfortable routine they'd built was about to be tested by forces far more dangerous than Benjamin's anger. Sometimes the greatest threat to love wasn't indifference, it was the appearance of a socially acceptable alternative. 1 week after Victoria's visit, Elena found Benjamin in the library at midnight, staring at a letter he'd been writing and rewriting for hours. Empty brandy bottles sat on the table beside stacks of crumpled paper. "Having trouble with your correspondence?" Elena asked gently, settling into the chair across from his desk. Benjamin looked up, his eyes bloodshot with exhaustion and alcohol. "Elena, you shouldn't be here. It's improper for a woman to visit a man's private quarters after dark." "According to whom? Miss Morrison?" Benjamin's laugh was bitter. "According to everyone, apparently. Do you know what I received today? 12 separate letters from concerned friends, explaining why I should marry Victoria and dismiss my inappropriate companion." Elena felt a chill run through her. 12 letters. "Seems Lady Morrison has been busy spreading word about my living situation." Benjamin held up the letter he'd been working on. "This is my response to Victoria's proposal." "And what does it say?" "That's what I can't decide." Benjamin set the letter down, his hands shaking slightly. "Elena, tell me honestly, has being here damaged your reputation beyond repair?" "My reputation was hardly pristine to begin with. I'm a widowed woman working alone, remember?" "That's not an answer." Eleanor was quiet for a moment, considering how much truth she was willing to share. "Yesterday, when I went to town for supplies, Mrs. Henderson crossed the street to avoid speaking to me. Mr. Jameson at the general store suggested I might be more comfortable shopping elsewhere. The minister's wife made a point of mentioning how important it was for young women to maintain proper moral standards." Benjamin's face went white. "Elena, I had no idea. It doesn't matter." "Of course it matters. You came here to work as a companion, not to be branded as some kind of what? Your mistress?" Elena's voice was calm, but Benjamin could see the hurt in her eyes. "Benjamin, do you care what they think? I care what happens to you because of me." "That's not what I asked." Eleanor leaned forward, her green-grey eyes intense. "I asked if you care what they think about us." Benjamin stared at her, the alcohol making him dangerously honest. "What is us, Elena? What are we really?" "I don't know, but I know what we could be if we were brave enough." "And what's that?" "Happy." The simple word hung between them like a lifeline. "Eleanor," Benjamin said quietly, "Victoria is offering me everything a man in my position should want. Respectability, social standing, a proper marriage that would silence all the gossip. And what are you offering her?" Security, status, a title. No mention of love in either direction. Benjamin was quiet for a long moment. Victoria says love can grow from mutual respect and shared goals. Can it? I don't know. I've never been in love before. Benjamin's honesty was stark. My previous engagements were all arrangements. I thought I understood how these things worked. And now I find myself thinking about things I never considered before, like how you laugh at my terrible jokes, how you never flinch when you help me transfer from the wheelchair, how you read to me in the evenings not because it's your job, but because you genuinely enjoy sharing stories. Eleanor felt her heart racing. Benjamin. And I find myself wondering if this is what other men feel when they talk about love. This constant awareness of another person. This feeling that everything is better when you're near and empty when you're gone. Elena stood abruptly, moving to the window. You're drunk. Yes, but that doesn't make what I'm saying untrue. It makes it dangerous. Why? Eleanor turned to face him, tears threatening in her eyes. Because I feel the same way. Because for the first time since David died, I wake up looking forward to something. Because I've fallen in love with a man who's about to marry someone else for all the sensible reasons. The confession hung between them like broken glass. Elena, don't. Elena held up a hand. Don't say anything you'll regret in the morning. Don't make promises you can't keep. Don't make this any harder than it already is. What if I don't want to marry Victoria? What if you do? What if 3 months from now you realize that love isn't enough to overcome social isolation? What if you decide that a woman with no fortune, no connections and a scandalous reputation isn't worth the sacrifice? Eleanor, I'm worth exactly what I've always been worth. Nothing, in the eyes of people who matter in your world. Elena's voice was steady, but Benjamin could see the pain behind her composure. Benjamin, I won't be the reason you make a choice you'll regret. If you marry Victoria, I'll leave quietly. If you don't, I'll stay as long as you need me. But I won't influence your decision. You already have influenced it. Just by being here, by caring about me, by making me remember what it feels like to be alive. Before Eleanor could respond, a commotion erupted from the front of the house. Voices, shouting, the sound of horses and carriages arriving at speed. What the hell? Benjamin began wheeling toward the door, Eleanor following. They found Phillips in the foyer looking harried and apologetic. Your lordship, I'm sorry to disturb you, but there's been an incident. What kind of incident? Miss Morrison is here. She arrived 20 minutes ago claiming someone attacked her carriage on the road. She says she needs sanctuary and protection. Where is she? The Blue Parlour. But sir, there's something else. She's claiming that Mrs. Foster sent men to frighten her away from the estate. Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. That's ridiculous. I've been here all evening. I know, ma'am, but Miss Morrison is quite insistent. She's demanding that you be dismissed immediately and that she be allowed to stay here for her protection. Benjamin's hands clenched on his wheelchair arms. This is convenient timing. Sir? Nothing, Phillips. Show us to the parlour. They found Victoria in the Blue Parlour, her elegant travelling dress artfully torn, her hair dishevelled in a way that suggested careful arrangement rather than genuine distress. She was sobbing delicately into a lace handkerchief. Benjamin, thank God you're safe. She rushed toward his wheelchair, throwing herself dramatically to her knees beside him. I was so frightened. Victoria, what happened? I was returning from evening visits when my carriage was surrounded by masked men. They didn't rob me. They just threatened me. Said I should stay away from Hartwell Manor if I knew what was good for me. Victoria's tear-filled eyes found Elena's face. And then one of them mentioned that a certain person had paid them to deliver the message. What person? Benjamin's voice was dangerous. They described a woman with reddish-brown hair and green eyes, a woman who had reason to want me gone. Victoria's gaze never left Elena's face. Someone who might feel threatened by my presence. Elena felt the trap closing around her. Miss Morrison, I've been in this house all evening. Phillips can verify. Can he? Were you together every moment? Could you have slipped out after the servants retired? Benjamin looked between the two women, his expression unreadable. Victoria, he said carefully, this is a serious accusation. I know, and I hate to make it, but Benjamin, you must see how this looks. This woman has isolated you from proper society, turned you against your friends, and now she's apparently willing to use violence to protect her position. Elena would never, wouldn't she? Victoria's voice was soft, reasonable. Benjamin, you said yourself that she's become very important to you, important enough that she might fear losing her comfortable situation to a legitimate wife. Elena realized with crystal clarity that Victoria had orchestrated everything: the attack, the timing, the accusations. It was perfectly designed to force Benjamin to choose between protecting Elena and maintaining his own reputation. "Benjamin," Elena said quietly, "I think I should leave." "No," his voice was firm. "Not until we get to the bottom of this." "There's nothing to get to the bottom of," Victoria said sweetly. "The facts are clear. This woman is dangerous, and for your own safety she needs to be removed from your household immediately." As Elena looked at Benjamin's troubled face, she realized that Victoria had won, not through love or genuine affection, but through manipulation and fear. And there was nothing Elena could do to fight back without proving everything Victoria had accused her of. Sometimes the most devastating attacks weren't violent. They were simply designed to make the truth impossible to prove. "Eleanor, pack your things." Benjamin's voice was cold, final. "I'll arrange for a carriage to take you to town first thing in the morning." Eleanor felt the words like physical blows, but she kept her expression steady. "Of course, your lordship." Victoria's smile was radiant with victory. "Benjamin, you're doing the right thing. I know it's difficult, but—" "Victoria, you'll stay in the guest wing tonight for your protection. Tomorrow we'll discuss your proposal properly." As Eleanor turned to leave, she caught Phillips's eye. The elderly butler looked stricken, clearly struggling with something he wanted to say but couldn't. 20 minutes later, as Eleanor folded her few belongings into the same worn traveling bag she'd arrived with, a soft knock came at her door. "Come in." Phillips entered, his face grave with concern. "Mrs. Foster, there's something you need to know." "Phillips, you don't need to—" "Yes, I do." The butler closed the door behind him. "What Miss Morrison described, the attack on her carriage, and it didn't happen." Eleanor paused in her packing. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I was watching from the East Tower when her carriage arrived. There was no distress, no frightened horses, no evidence of any attack. Miss Morrison stepped down from her carriage, spent several minutes arranging her appearance, and only then began her performance." "Phillips, are you certain?" "Absolutely. Moreover, I recognized one of her footmen. He's actually an actor from the Boston Theatre District. I saw him perform last year in a production of Hamlet." Eleanor sank onto her bed, the pieces clicking into place. "She staged the entire thing." "It appears so. But Mrs. Foster, even if I told his lordship what I saw, it would be my word against hers. And given the social pressures he's under, he can't afford to believe me over her." Elena finished packing with renewed determination. "Phillips, don't say anything to Benjamin. It won't change the outcome, and it might cost you your position. Ma'am, you can't just leave like this. His lordship, he's different since you came here. Better, happier. If I stay, I'll destroy any chance he has at a normal life." Eleanor shouldered her bag. "Sometimes loving someone means knowing when to walk away." "Mrs. Foster," Eleanor was already heading for the servant's stair, planning to slip out before dawn rather than face a formal farewell. She couldn't bear to see Benjamin's relief when she was finally gone. But as she reached the main hallway, she heard voices coming from the library. Victoria's voice, raised in what sounded like celebration. "Finally rid of that dreadful woman. Benjamin, you can't imagine how relieved I am. The way she looked at you, the possessiveness. It was quite disturbing." Eleanor paused, something in Victoria's tone making her uneasy. "Now we can begin planning properly. I was thinking a small private ceremony, given your circumstances, of course, nothing too elaborate, and afterward we'll need to discuss the estate management. My father has some excellent ideas about modernizing your investments." Eleanor felt cold dread settle in her stomach. Victoria was already making plans, already taking control. "Victoria, slow down. I haven't given you an answer yet." "Oh, but darling, surely after tonight's events the answer is obvious. You need protection from women like Elena Foster. And I need—" Victoria paused, and when she continued, her voice had lost all pretense of affection. "Well, I need your fortune, of course." Eleanor pressed herself against the wall, hardly daring to breathe. "My fortune? Oh, Benjamin, you didn't think I was doing this out of love, did you?" Victoria's laugh was like breaking glass. "I'm 28 years old, still unmarried, and my father's gambling debts have left our family nearly bankrupt. Marrying you solves all my problems quite neatly." Eleanor heard the sound of Benjamin's wheelchair moving, probably trying to distance himself from Victoria. "You're saying this marriage would be purely financial? For me, yes. For you, it's a chance to silence the gossips and live respectably. We both get what we need." "And what about children? Affection, companionship? We'll have children for the sake of inheritance, naturally. As for the rest—" Victoria's voice turned cold. "Benjamin, you're a cripple. You should be grateful any woman of breeding is willing to marry you at all." The cruelty of the words hit Elena like a slap. Furthermore, Victoria continued, "Once we're married, we'll need to establish some ground rules. I won't have you forming inappropriate attachments to servants again. I'll manage the household staff, and you'll focus on your books and investments. A clean, business-like arrangement." "Victoria?" "Oh, and we'll need to address your living situation. This isolation isn't healthy. I'm planning to host regular social gatherings here. People of proper standing, of course. You'll need to learn to present yourself appropriately in society again." Eleanor heard Benjamin's sharp intake of breath. "Present myself appropriately? Well, darling, you can't spend the rest of your life hiding in your library feeling sorry for yourself. Yes, you're disabled, but with the right management, you can still be useful to society. I have it all planned out." The patronizing tone in Victoria's voice made Elena's hands clench into fists. "I see." Benjamin's voice was dangerously quiet. "And what if I decide I prefer my current arrangements?" "Don't be silly. Without that foster woman filling your head with romantic nonsense, you'll see sense. Really, Benjamin, the idea that a man in your condition could inspire genuine love, it's rather pathetic." Eleanor had heard enough. She was reaching for the library door when Benjamin's voice stopped her. "Victoria, I need to ask you something." "Of course, darling." "The attack on your carriage tonight. Can you describe the men who threatened you again?" Victoria launched into her rehearsed story, but Eleanor noticed she was adding details that hadn't been there before, inconsistencies that suggested improvisation rather than memory. "And you're certain one of them mentioned Elena specifically?" "Absolutely. They described her perfectly." "Strange," Benjamin said mildly, "because Elena has been in my sight all evening. We were together in the library when Phillips announced your arrival." Eleanor held her breath. She must have slipped out earlier. "No, Victoria, she didn't, which means either you're lying about the attack or someone else entirely is behind it." The silence stretched unbearably. "Benjamin, surely you're not suggesting—" "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm stating a fact. Elena didn't arrange any attack because she was with me when it supposedly happened. Well, perhaps I was mistaken about the description. Or perhaps," Benjamin's voice was steel, "there was no attack at all." Victoria's composure finally cracked. "How dare you question my word? How dare you fabricate evidence to destroy an innocent woman's reputation?" "Innocent? Benjamin, that woman has you completely under her spell. She's nothing but a fortune-hunting widow who cared for me without thought of reward, who treated me like a man instead of an invalid, who never once asked for anything beyond fair wages for honest work." Elena felt tears threatening as she heard Benjamin defend her with such fierce conviction. "You're being naive." "No, Victoria. For the first time in 2 years, I'm being honest. About what I want, about what I need, about what I feel." "And what do you feel?" "I feel like I've been sleepwalking through my life, accepting pity and obligation instead of demanding genuine connection. I feel like I've been a coward, hiding behind my disability instead of fighting for what matters." Eleanor heard movement, the sound of his wheelchair approaching the door. "Benjamin, where are you going?" "To find Elena before she disappears from my life forever. If you choose her over me, you'll regret it. Society will never accept." "Then society can go to hell." As the library door burst open, Elena stepped back, but not fast enough to avoid being seen. Benjamin stopped his wheelchair abruptly, his blue-grey eyes finding hers in the dim hallway. "Elena, how much did you hear?" "Enough. Enough to know that I've been a fool? Enough to know that you're not the only one who's been sleepwalking." They stared at each other across the space that suddenly felt charged with possibility. "Eleanor," Benjamin said quietly, "I have something to ask you and I need you to answer honestly." "What?" "Do you love me?" The simple question hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. "Yes," Eleanor whispered. "God help me." "Yes." "Then marry me. Not because it's convenient or socially acceptable or financially advantageous. Marry me because we choose each other, completely and without reservation." Behind Benjamin, Victoria's gasp of outrage echoed through the hallway, but Elena only had eyes for the man in the wheelchair who had just offered her everything she'd never dared hope for. "Benjamin, the scandal will fade, but if I let you walk away tonight, I'll spend the rest of my life regretting it." Eleanor looked into his eyes and saw her future, not perfect but real, not easy but worth fighting for. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I'll marry you." As Benjamin reached for her hand, Eleanor realized that sometimes the most important battles weren't fought with weapons, They were fought with truth, courage, and the willingness to choose love over fear. Even when the whole world was watching, Victoria's scream of rage shattered the romantic moment like glass. "You cannot be serious. Benjamin, you're throwing away everything, your reputation, your standing, your future, for this nobody." Before Benjamin could respond, the front door of Hartwell Manor burst open with such violence that it slammed against the wall. Lord Morrison strode in, flanked by Sheriff Davies and 3 other men Elena didn't recognize. "Where is she?" Morrison's voice boomed through the foyer. "Where's the woman who dared to threaten my daughter?" Eleanor felt Benjamin's hand tighten protectively on hers. "Lord Morrison," Benjamin said calmly, "what's the meaning of this intrusion?" "The meaning, Hartwell, is that your servant conspired to have my Victoria murdered on the road tonight." Sheriff Davies stepped forward, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Mrs. Foster, I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of conspiracy to commit assault." Eleanor stared at the warrant in disbelief. "This is impossible. I never—" "Save your denials." Victoria emerged from the library, her face flushed with triumph. "Father, thank goodness you're here. She's been trying to turn Benjamin against me all evening." "Victoria," Benjamin's voice was dangerously quiet, "we both know there was no attack." "There was, and I have proof." Victoria pulled a torn piece of fabric from her reticule. "This was left behind by one of the attackers. Notice the color. Brown wool, exactly like the dress Mrs. Foster is wearing." Eleanor looked down at her dress in shock. The fabric was indeed a perfect match. "That proves nothing," Benjamin said firmly. "Half the women in Massachusetts own brown wool dresses." "Perhaps. But how do you explain this?" Sheriff Davies produced a letter from his coat. "A witness came forward an hour ago, claiming Mrs. Foster paid him to hire men to frighten Miss Morrison away from the estate." Elena felt the trap closing around her with suffocating precision. "What witness?" Benjamin demanded. "Tom Bradshaw, sir. He works at the tavern in town. Says Mrs. Foster approached him yesterday, offered him $20 to arrange Miss Morrison's accident." Eleanor's mind raced. She'd never met any Tom Bradshaw, had never been to any tavern, and certainly had never paid anyone to do anything. "This is all fabricated," she said desperately. "Benjamin, you know I would never—" "Of course it's fabricated." Benjamin's voice rose with fury. "This is all an elaborate performance designed to— Designed to what?" Lord Morrison stepped closer, his face red with anger. "To frame an innocent servant. Why on earth would my daughter go to such lengths? Because she wants to marry me for my money, and Eleanor is in her way." "Benjamin!" Victoria's gasp was perfectly timed. "How could you say such a thing?" "Because I heard you, Victoria. Not 20 minutes ago you admitted this marriage was purely financial for you. You called me a cripple, who should be grateful any woman would have me." Victoria's eyes widened in apparent shock. "Benjamin, you're clearly distraught. The stress of this situation has affected your judgment. My judgment is perfectly clear. For the first time in 2 years, I see exactly what's happening here." Sheriff Davies cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Your lordship, with all due respect, we still have the matter of the evidence against Mrs. Foster." "What evidence?" "A piece of common fabric and the testimony of a man who's probably been paid to lie." "Sir, I have to follow the law. Mrs. Foster, you need to come with me." Eleanor felt the world tilting around her. In minutes she would be in jail, and Benjamin would be left to Victoria's manipulations. "Wait!" A new voice cut through the chaos. Phillips appeared from the shadows, his face pale but determined. "Sheriff Davies, before you arrest Mrs. Foster, there's something you need to see." "Phillips, what are you doing?" Benjamin asked urgently. "The right thing, sir." Phillips pulled a telescope from behind his back. "This evening I was adjusting the clock in the East Tower when I noticed Miss Morrison's carriage approaching. Something seemed off about the situation, so I watched through this." He handed the telescope to Sheriff Davies. "What I saw was Miss Morrison stepping down from her completely undamaged carriage, speaking calmly with a man I later recognized as an actor from Boston, and then deliberately tearing her dress and disheveling her hair before approaching the house." Victoria's face went white. That's absurd. This man is clearly mistaken. Furthermore," Phillips continued relentlessly, "I observed her giving money to the same actor, who then departed immediately. No attack, no distress, no masked men." "You're lying!" Victoria shrieked. "Actually," Sheriff Davies said quietly, studying Victoria's face, "it would explain why Tom Bradshaw's story seemed rehearsed when he told it, and why the fabric evidence appeared so conveniently." Lord Morrison stared at his daughter in growing horror. "Victoria, tell me this isn't true. Father, you can't believe the word of a servant over your own daughter. I can believe the evidence of my own eyes, Benjamin said coldly. Victoria, you orchestrated this entire evening. The fake attack, the false accusations, probably even bribing this Bradshaw fellow to lie about Elena. So what if I did? Victoria's composure finally shattered completely. You were going to throw your life away on a worthless servant. Someone had to save you from yourself. The admission hung in the air like smoke. Miss Morrison, Sheriff Davies said grimly, filing false charges is a serious crime, as is conspiracy to defame someone's character. You can't arrest me, I'm a Morrison. You're a criminal, Benjamin said flatly, and you're no longer welcome in my home. As Sheriff Davies began reading Victoria her rights, Lord Morrison approached Benjamin with obvious embarrassment. Hartwell, I don't know what to say. If I had known what Victoria was planning, you would have what? Stopped her? Or just made sure she didn't get caught? Morrison flinched. That's unfair. Is it? Your daughter just admitted to fabricating assault charges, bribing witnesses, and attempting to destroy an innocent woman's life, all to secure a wealthy marriage. Benjamin's voice was ice cold. Forgive me if I question your family's moral standards. As Victoria was led away in handcuffs, still shrieking about the injustice of her situation, the manor finally fell quiet. Eleanor stood in the hallway, hardly able to believe the nightmare was over. Mrs. Foster, Sheriff Davies said quietly, I owe you an apology. And Count Hartwell, I'm sorry for the intrusion. After the officials left, Benjamin turned to Phillips. Phillips, why didn't you tell me immediately what you'd seen? Sir, I wasn't certain you'd believe me over Miss Morrison, and I thought perhaps it would be better to let events play out, to see what choices people made when they thought no one was watching. And what did you see? Phillips smiled slightly. I saw you choose love over convenience, truth over social acceptability, and Mrs. Foster over everything else that supposedly mattered. Benjamin turned to Elena, his blue-gray eyes soft with emotion. Elena, I'm sorry, I should have trusted you immediately. I should have... You did trust me, Elena interrupted. When it mattered most, you chose to believe in me over everything else. Even when I initially asked you to leave? Even then, because I saw your face when you realized what Victoria really was. You were protecting me the only way you knew how. Benjamin reached for her hands, pulling her closer to his wheelchair. Eleanor Foster, you are the strongest, most remarkable woman I've ever known. You've taught me that love isn't about what you can't do. It's about what you choose to do with what you have. And what do you choose to do? I choose to spend the rest of my life proving that you're worth every scandal, every raised eyebrow, every whispered criticism. Benjamin's voice grew stronger. I choose to love you completely, publicly, and without apology. Benjamin, the society gossip, will eventually find something else to talk about, but our love, that will last forever. As Benjamin pulled Elena down for a kiss that was both gentle and fierce, Phillips quietly withdrew, leaving them alone in the foyer where their story had truly begun. Some battles, Elena realized, were won not with violence or manipulation, but with simple truth and the courage to stand by it. And sometimes the most powerful weapon against cruelty was refusing to let it change who you were. 6 weeks later, the wedding of Count Benjamin Hartwell and Elena Foster became the social event that divided New England society, half scandalized by his choice, half enchanted by the obvious love between them. Elena stood before the mirror in the manor's master bedroom, adjusting her simple but elegant ivory silk gown. She had refused Benjamin's offers to buy her something more elaborate, preferring the dress she'd sewn herself, with careful attention to both modesty and beauty. You look radiant, came a familiar voice from the doorway. Elena turned to find Mrs. Henderson, the minister's wife who had snubbed her in town weeks ago, standing with an apologetic smile and a bouquet of winter roses. Mrs. Henderson, I wasn't expecting to see you here. I came to apologize. The older woman stepped into the room, her face earnest. After Victoria Morrison's arrest and the truth came out about what she'd done, well, I realized how wrong I was about you, about the whole situation. Eleanor accepted the flowers graciously. Thank you for coming. The whole town's been talking, you know, about how Count Hartwell defended you, how you never once tried to defend yourself with gossip or lies. Mrs. Henderson's voice grew warm. That takes real character, Mrs. Foster. Mrs. Hartwell, actually, as of an hour ago. Of course, forgive me. Mrs. Henderson smiled. Mrs. Hartwell, I wanted you to know, you've changed how a lot of us think about love and marriage. Seeing how happy the Count has become, how you've brought life back to this old house, Well, it's made us reconsider what really matters. After Mrs. Henderson left, Eleanor found herself alone with her reflection. The woman staring back at her was transformed, not by wealth or status, but by the confidence that came from being truly loved. A gentle knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in." Benjamin wheeled into the room, magnificent in his formal wedding attire. The sight of him still made her breath catch, not despite his wheelchair, but because of everything he'd overcome to be here. "You're not supposed to see me before the ceremony," Elena said with a smile. "We've already had the ceremony, remember? This is our wedding night." Benjamin's eyes were warm with humor and something deeper. "I came to give you something." He produced a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. "Benjamin, the ring was already—" "This isn't a ring." He opened the box to reveal an intricate gold locket. "It belonged to my mother. She wore it every day for 35 years of marriage to my father." Elena lifted the locket carefully, admiring the delicate engravings. "It's beautiful. But Benjamin, this is a family heirloom. Shouldn't it go to my wife, which is you?" Benjamin's voice was gentle but firm. "Eleanor, you are my family now. The most important family I've ever had." As he fastened the locket around her neck, Elena felt the weight of acceptance, of truly belonging somewhere. "There's an engraving inside," Benjamin said softly. Elena opened the locket to find her wedding date and a simple inscription: "Love chooses courage over convention." "Did you have this engraved?" "My father did, for my mother. He was a younger son who married a merchant's daughter against his family's wishes." Benjamin's smile was soft with memory. "Apparently, I come by my rebellious romantic streak honestly." "And what did his family say about his choice?" "They disowned him completely, cut off his inheritance, refused to acknowledge the marriage." Benjamin paused. "It was the happiest marriage I've ever witnessed." Eleanor felt tears threaten. "Benjamin, are you sure you're ready for that kind of rejection?" "Elena, look around." Benjamin gestured toward the window, where they could see carriages arriving for their wedding celebration. "Half of New England's most prominent families are here tonight, not because they approve of our marriage, but because they can't ignore it." "What do you mean?" "I mean that since our engagement was announced, I've received 17 business proposals, 12 invitations to political events, and 43 social invitations. Apparently, a happy count is much more interesting than a bitter recluse." Eleanor moved to the window, watching their guests arrive. Among the carriages, she recognized faces from town: shopkeepers, farmers, working families who had never been invited to a nobleman's wedding before. "You invited the townspeople." "I invited everyone who matters to us, status be damned." "The society ladies must be horrified." "Probably, but they're still here, aren't they?" Benjamin joined her at the window. "Eleanor, what we've built together, it's stronger than their disapproval. It's real in a way that their arranged marriages and social climbing could never be." As if summoned by his words, Phillips appeared in the doorway. "Your lordship, Mrs. Hartwell, the guests are assembled for the reception, and there's someone here who particularly wants to meet Mrs. Hartwell." "Who?" Phillips stepped aside to reveal a distinguished elderly gentleman in military dress. "General Morrison, sir. Lord Morrison's brother." Eleanor felt Benjamin tense beside her. "Count Hartwell, Mrs. Hartwell." General Morrison stepped forward with a crisp bow. "I came to offer my apologies for my family's behavior and my congratulations on your marriage." "General Morrison," Benjamin replied carefully, "I wasn't aware you would be attending." "I wasn't planning to. But after Victoria's arrest and the truth about her schemes came to light," the general's face grew stern. "Well, I felt it was important to publicly separate myself from such behavior." He turned to Elena with genuine respect. "Mrs. Hartwell, my niece's actions were reprehensible. She attempted to destroy your reputation and manipulate my nephew-in-law through lies and fraud. I want you to know that such behavior does not represent the Morrison family's true character." "Thank you, General. That's very kind. Furthermore," the general continued, "I've spoken with several other families who were misled by Victoria's version of events. They wish to extend their apologies as well." Eleanor felt a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying begin to lift. "That's not necessary." "Yes, it is. What my niece did was attempted character assassination. The least we can do is publicly restore your reputation." As the general departed, Elena turned to Benjamin with wonder in her eyes. "I think we may have won more than just each other." "What do you mean?" "I mean Victoria's schemes backfired. Instead of destroying our reputation, she exposed her own character, and in defending me, you showed everyone what real love looks like." The reception that followed was unlike any wedding celebration New England had ever seen. Farmers danced alongside aristocrats, servants shared tables with society ladies, and the bride and groom moved through the crowd with a happiness that was infectious. Late that evening, as the last guests departed, Eleanor found herself in the garden with Benjamin, both of them wrapped in warm cloaks against the winter air. "Any regrets?" Benjamin asked, his breath visible in the cold. "Only one." "What's that?" "I regret that we wasted so much time being afraid of what other people thought." Elena turned to face him fully. "Benjamin, this evening proved that when you choose love boldly, openly, without apology, people respond to that authenticity. Even the people who initially disapproved, especially them. Because deep down, everyone wants to believe that real love exists, that it's possible to build something beautiful despite the obstacles." Benjamin reached for her hands, pulling her closer to his chair. "Eleanor Hartwell, what do you want for our future? I want to wake up every morning choosing you again. I want to fill this house with laughter and love. I want to prove that the best marriages aren't built on social expectations, but on daily decisions to support each other's dreams." "And what are your dreams?" Elena smiled, thinking of the plans she'd been developing: a school for working-class children, a medical clinic for families who couldn't afford doctors, ways to use Benjamin's resources and her skills to help their community. "I want to matter, not because I married well, but because I lived well, because we lived well together." "Then that's exactly what we'll do." 5 years later, Hartwell Manor had become the social and charitable center of their county. Elena's school educated over 100 children, regardless of their family's ability to pay. Benjamin's political involvement had led to several progressive reforms in disability rights and social welfare, but their greatest achievement was visible every evening at sunset, when they could be found in their garden, Benjamin in his chair, Elena beside him, often with children from the school or neighbors who had come to visit. "Tell us the story again," 6-year-old Mary Patterson demanded one evening, settling on the blanket beside Elena's chair. "About how you and the Count fell in love." Elena looked at Benjamin, who smiled and nodded. "Once upon a time," Elena began, "there was a lonely man who thought his life was over, and a sad woman who thought love only happened to other people." "That's the wrong beginning," little Tom Henderson protested. "It should start once upon a time a brave woman touched a grumpy man's wheelchair and changed everything." Benjamin laughed, the sound rich and free. "Tom's right. That's exactly how it started." "And they lived happily ever after?" Mary asked. "Better," Eleanor said, taking Benjamin's hand as the sun set behind them. "They lived truthfully ever after, which means they chose each other every day, worked through problems together, and built something beautiful that lasted forever." As the children ran off to play and the stars began to appear, Elena rested her head against Benjamin's shoulder. "Any regrets now?" he asked softly. "Only that we can't go back and tell our younger selves not to be so afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Of believing we deserved this much happiness." Benjamin lifted her hand to his lips, kissing the gold band that had replaced her widow's ring. "Elena, we didn't just deserve it. We fought for it. We chose it. We built it together, one brave decision at a time. And as the moon rose over their home, their community, their life built on love instead of convention, Elena realized that some fairy tales don't end with happily ever after. The best ones end with courageously ever after, because courage, not perfection, was what made love last. 20 years later, spring 1871, the gentle May breeze carried the scent of blooming roses through the gardens of Hartwell Manor, where a very special celebration was about to begin. Elena Hartwell, now 46, watched from the main veranda as elegant carriages arrived for what all of New England was calling the wedding of the century. Her reddish-brown hair now showed silver threads at the temples, and laugh lines around her eyes testified to decades of genuine joy. She wore a simple but elegant navy silk dress and the gold locket Benjamin had given her on their wedding night. "Nervous?" Benjamin approached in his wheelchair, still strikingly handsome at 55. His dark blonde hair was now completely silver, but his blue-grey eyes sparkled with the same vitality as when they first met. "Excited," Elena corrected, adjusting his tie affectionately. "Our daughter is marrying the man she loves." How could I not be excited? Through the window they could see Margaret Hartwell, their 19-year-old adopted daughter, whom they had taken in when she was just 5 and orphaned by the Civil War, being helped into her wedding dress by her adopted sisters. "Remember when she arrived here?" Benjamin smiled tenderly, so small and frightened, convinced no one would ever love her. "And look at her now. Eleanor watched Margaret laugh with the other girls. All daughters Elena and Benjamin had adopted over the years, creating a family that defied every social convention. She's radiant, just like her mother was on our wedding day. Eleanor smiled, remembering the frightened young woman who had touched his wheelchair 2 decades ago. Benjamin, do you regret anything? All the conventions we broke, all the traditions we challenged? Only one thing, Benjamin replied, taking her hand. What? Not being brave enough to love you from the very first moment you walked into that library. The ceremony was held in the same garden where Eleanor and Benjamin had made so many important decisions over the years. Margaret married Dr. James Mitchell, a young physician who had fallen in love not just with her, but with the entire unconventional family she represented. During the reception, Eleanor found herself surrounded by familiar faces, former students from her school, now successful adults, families she had helped through the free medical clinic, politicians Benjamin had influenced toward progressive reforms. Mrs. Hartwell, a young voice called her attention. Eleanor turned to see an elegant woman of about 25, accompanied by a distinguished man. Yes, I'm Catherine Morrison. Well, Catherine Morrison Williams now, Victoria Morrison's niece. Eleanor felt a brief tightening in her chest, remembering the woman who had tried to destroy her happiness so many years ago. Mrs. Morrison Williams, it's a pleasure to meet you. The pleasure is mine. I wanted to thank you. Thank me? For forgiving my family, for showing grace where there could have been bitterness. Catherine's voice grew earnest. My Aunt Victoria, what she did was terrible, but the way you and the Count handled it, the dignity you showed, it changed how our family sees love and marriage. Elena studied the young face, seeing genuine sincerity. Catherine, what your aunt did was painful, but it also taught us something valuable. What? That true love cannot be destroyed by lies or manipulation. It can only be strengthened by them. Later that night, after the last guests departed and the daughters settled into their rooms, Elena and Benjamin found themselves once again in their favorite garden. 20 years, Elena murmured, settling into the chair beside his. 20 years of you being right about everything, Benjamin replied with humor. I wasn't right about everything. Yes, you were. You were right about love growing from daily choice. You were right about building something beautiful together. You were right about our unconventional family being exactly what we needed. Eleanor looked around at the property they had transformed, the school that now educated over 500 children per year, the medical clinic that provided free care to needy families, the house that had become a refuge for any child who needed love. Benjamin, what do you think Margaret will remember about growing up here? That love has nothing to do with perfection and everything to do with persistence. That family isn't determined by blood, but by choice. That it's worth fighting for what's true, even when the world says you're wrong. And what do you want our grandchildren to remember about us? Benjamin thought for a moment, watching the stars beginning to appear. I want them to remember that their grandparents chose love over convenience, courage over conformity, and truth over appearances. And that choice created something so beautiful, it lasted generations. Elena took his hand, intertwining their fingers as they had done thousands of times over the years. You know what I think is the best part of our story? What? That it's not just ours. All these children we raised, all these families we helped, all these young people we educated, they're going to carry our story forward. They're going to teach their children that true love is possible, that happiness is worth fighting for. A legacy of courage, a legacy of hope. The next morning, Elena woke to find a letter on the breakfast table. It was from Margaret, written the night before. Dearest Mama Elena and Papa Benjamin, as I write this on the morning after my wedding, I'm thinking about how you taught me what love really means. Not the perfect moments in fairy tale books, but the daily choices to care, support, and grow together. You showed me that true nobility doesn't come from titles or money, but from how we treat those who can do nothing for us. That true strength isn't never falling, but always getting back up. Most importantly, you taught me that love, real, lasting love, is about choosing someone not just in the easy moments, but especially when things get difficult. James and I want to build the kind of marriage you have, the kind that inspires others, that heals wounds, that creates beauty where there was once pain. Thank you for showing me that happily ever after isn't about having no problems, it's about facing them together. With all my love, Margaret. Elena passed the letter to Benjamin, watching tears form in his eyes as he read. I think we did something right, he said softly. I think we did everything right. In that moment, In the morning garden of Hartwell Manor, surrounded by the legacy of love they had built together, Elena and Benjamin Hartwell understood something profound about true love stories. They don't end when the couple gets married. They continue generation after generation, in every life touched by their courage, in every heart inspired by their hope, in every soul that learns that true love isn't a fairy tale. It's a daily choice to build something beautiful together, no matter what the world says. And that's a story that never really ends. It's one that continues forever, in every person brave enough to choose love over fear, truth over convenience, and hope over despair. The kind of story worth living. The kind of story worth telling. The kind of story that once begun echoes through the ages. What do you think of this story? Leave a comment and give it a like if it moved you. Share it so more people can see it.